Okay, already. It looks like most of you already answered the question. So the first poll question is, how do you water your gardens? Um, about 38% is hand watering using a hose with shut-off nozzle, and same amounts, 38% using drip irrigation, 13% using sprinklers, and 13% say that they don't have a garden yet. And second question, do you use compost and or mulch in your gardens? So 25% say yes, I use both. 13% says yes, only use compost. 13% says I only use mulch. And 25% saying no, I don't know. I don't use neither. So probably after today's webinar, you might um, get more information on how to use compost and mulch in your garden. And then 25% say they don't have a garden yet. Question number three, what type of water-wise edible plants interest you the most? 75% say vegetables, for example, tomatoes, pepper, and kale. And 25% say they're not sure. Question number four, what is your biggest challenge when it comes to growing edible plants? So 25% says not enough space. 25% say um, watering efficiently. 35, 38% says choosing the right plants. And 13% says other. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna end the poll here and share result. Okay. Okay. I'm gonna share my screen now. Okay. Share. Great. Good evening, everyone. I'm Claire Wong from the city of Sunnyvale, and I'll be moderating tonight's program. Along with our co-sponsor, Spaska, and our instructor, Loretta O'Brien, I want to welcome all of you to our class. Before we begin the program, I am going to provide some guidelines for successful participation in the webinar. First, all attendees are muted by default to reduce the background noise to the presentation. For today's class, we ask that you save any questions that you might have for the end of a section. If you would like to ask a question, you can do so in two ways. The first option is to use the raise hand feature. I will then call upon you and unmute you to ask your question. Second option is to type your question in the Q&A. I will then read questions to the instructor or respond directly in the chat. And this illustration shows where you can find the raise hand button and the Q&A button. I would also like to note that this webinar is being recorded and will be made available on Bosco's website. Now that we have that out of the way, I would like to share a little background on Bosco's landscape education program. Bosca is a special district that represents the interests of 26 cities, water district, and private water companies, all of which purchase wholesale water from the San Francisco Regional Water Supply. Bosco member agencies collectively serve over 1.8 million residents and 40,000 businesses in San Mateo, Santa Clara, and Alameda counties. Bosca's goal is to ensure a reliable supply of high-quality water at a fair price for agencies and their customers. Consistent with that goal, Bosca provides a regional water conservation program to support our agencies in improving water use efficiency. The landscape education program is one element of that conservation program. While we have made significant strides in water use efficiency in the past decade, there is still more room for improvement. Outdoor water use represents the single largest untapped opportunity for water conservation in the Bosca surface area. Outdoor water use reduction through the use of water-efficient plants and innovative techniques can help conserve water and ensure that the future water supply needs of our communities are met. A few highlights on additional conservation programs that may be of interest to you. Valley Water has several rain barrel rebates. You can get up to $35 for installing a rain barrel, 50 cents a gallon for installing a cistern, and $1 per square foot of a rain garden. Bosca has a newly redesigned landscape rebate program which provides rebates to customers of participating water agencies for replacing water intensive lawn space with water efficient landscaping. Bosca also has the I Heart Great Water program, which gives residents up to $200 in rebates for connecting a washing machine to a gray water irrigation system. Next, there's the Bosca Lawn Begun rebate, which gives residents various rebates for transforming their lawns and making them more water efficient. Another program by Bosca is the Smart Controller program, which provides instant rebates and heavily discounted pricing on purchase of the Rectual 3 irrigation controller. This controller can be operated on your smartphone and normally retails for $280. Through this program, customers of participating water agencies can purchase that controller for only $100 plus tax. For more information or to find out which of these programs are available in your area, visit bayareaconservation.org. The City of Sunnyvale encourages you to participate in rebate programs offered by Valley Water. They offer $2 per square foot of rebates for replacing your lawns and plants that require a lot of water with drought-tolerant plants or permeable hardscape. We also offer up to $200 in rebates for properties that connect a closed washer to gray water irrigation system. In order to qualify for these rebates, please make sure you apply first. A common mistake is that residents get too excited about the rebates and start transforming their lawn before making sure that they qualify. Also, are you looking for compost? Free compost and mulch are available for Sunnyvale residents at the Smart Station. Stop by Monday through Sunday 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. with your own shovel and container. Additional information on water-wise gardening can be found on southbaygreen.gardens.org, where they also have some landscape designs and templates as well. It is a great way to get some ideas before you go ahead and apply for those rebates. Here is a snapshot of the Waterwise Gardening's website. It provides resources to support residents in water efficient landscape renovations and management. Resources include a gallery of gardens with plants identified, plant selection tool, and even a watering calculator. If you enjoyed tonight's program, we invite you to check out our upcoming webinar classes. You can view the full schedule and register at bayareaconservation.org. If you're interested in staying up to date with Sunnyvale's Environmental Services Department, make sure to subscribe or follow us on social media. Feel free to scan the QR codes or search using the green text provided. We share tips and tricks for living sustainably in Sunnyvale, as well as rebates, information, and upcoming events. If you have questions about rebate programs, please contact Valley Water for more information. Now I have the pleasure of introducing our instructor, Loretta O'Brien. She is the co-founder and director of Pacifica Gardens, a community urban food growing project in Pacifica, and has been the garden manager since 2008. Loretta has been an avid gardener for most of her life, having grown up with annual backyard vegetable gardens. She has urban gardening training in permaculture design from SF Botanical Gardens and bio-intensive mini farming from Ecology Action at Willis, California. She is an active member of the San Mateo, San Francisco County Master Gardeners. Loretta, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I am going to stop sharing and you can take it away.
Okay, so it appears as though everybody can see our screen. So just want to really thank Claire and the City of Sunnyvale and Bosca for giving me this opportunity to talk about water-wise backyard gardening. And I have, as usual, tons of information here. It looks like many people have some experience gardening and which is great. We're going to go through the basics here, and we'll stop occasionally for some questions and answers. Okay, so the first thing that we'd like to kind of just really outline pretty quickly are the keys to water-wise gardening generally, but then specifically for vegetable gardening. So your garden plan, we encourage everybody to create a garden plan to minimize water use. So that concept of planting the right plant at the right place and at the right time holds true here. We'll talk a little bit about soil improvement and creating living soil and using compost. That's going to be a big component of a water-wise garden. And we'll talk about some planting methods that will minimize water use, specifically proper spacing between your plants. And effective and efficient watering, and encourage people to use drip irrigation if possible, protecting our soil throughout the year, and using mulch. Mulch is going to be a huge factor. So I want to point out that there's this amazing video from the Sonoma County Master Gardeners. Claire is going to give everybody that link. It's a pretty short video, but it really does outline very well the components to a water-wise a vegetable gardening. We've had in California droughts upon droughts, and so many of us feel like, oh, we can't even grow our own vegetables anymore. This video really encourages us to continue growing, but if we implement a few key issues, we can have a lovely garden, feed ourselves, and then also save water. So we're going to talk a little bit about creating a plan. So creating a plan, is also fun. Sometimes if we don't know how to do that, we have no idea what we're going to do. So we're going to kind of run through a few things. The first thing that we need to talk about is your garden size. So, not everybody has a lot of space, but some people have quite a bit of space. And if you're beginning a garden, just beginning a garden, I would suggest that you start smaller rather than bigger. We're going to talk a little bit about the location of your garden beds, the hours of sunlight that are necessary for plants to grow. Some will touch very briefly on issues of shade and wind, and then urban wildlife. I will spend some time talking about the types of garden beds that are that we have that we can use, okay, including raised beds, in-ground beds, and containers. And we'll talk quite a bit about soil and compost and putting together a watering plan. Again, starting small, we want to set ourselves up for success. If you all of a sudden woke up one day and you say, hey, I want my whole backyard planted in vegetables, and you've never done that before, that might be a bit of a challenge to have some success. So set yourself up for success, and maybe begin with one or two small beds, or a couple of really large pots, or wine barrels. Those would be great ways to start, and expand your garden as you begin to have some success. And I use this little 3x3, maybe a couple of small 3x3 beds would be a good place to start. Or if you don't have even that much space, then you're going to be doing more container gardening. One of the things that we really want to make sure before we do anything is where are we going to put our garden? We need to find a sunny location. Now, in Sunnyvale, that's not usually too hard because you have lots of sun. But we want to just to make sure that we plant our garden so that the site has at least during the main growing period at least 8 hours during the day of full sun. Okay, and in our hemisphere, we're going to be trying to set up our garden on the south or the southwest side of our home or our abode. So I'm fortunate enough to have my backyard garden faces the south. My front yard garden faces the north. So I got really, really lucky. Some people don't always have that, but if you know, do that as much as you possibly can. If you live in a really windy area, take that into consideration. You may need to work on how um, doing some mitigating for wind. Okay, but if you can choose a place with minimal wind exposure, that would be great. Wind actually dries out the plants pretty quickly. Obviously, blows the soil around, and can actually blow the plants around too. We all have to probably deal with urban wildlife. Deer and other wildlife can destroy our garden beds pretty quickly. So we want to make if that is an issue that you may have, take that into consideration as you're planning your garden. You may need to deer proof, put some kind of a deer proofing strategy. This garden bed here, that this image of this right here is actually a pretty good protected from deer and whatnot. It actually has some screen on it as well. And if you have animals, dogs and cats, chickens and goats, you're most likely going to need to fence your garden beds from those animals because they absolutely will love digging and eating your garden. We'll talk a little bit about raised beds, in-ground beds, and containers. And I'm going to talk about the raised beds first. Most of us are going to probably be doing some type of raised beds over time. So let's talk a little bit about the advantages. First of all, the advantage is easy access for gardeners. So the in-ground beds can be a little bit more difficult to work in sometimes, especially as we get older, if we have physical limitations. Our path spaces are much more easily maintained, and we do have the ability to create optimal soil texture. So sandy versus clay, you know, we're going to be looking at some nice little loam in the middle here. And we do have the ability with our raised beds to add gopher screen to keep our gophers and moles under control. And raised beds are much easier to install a drip irrigation system. Although you can put a drip irrigation system in ground beds, that is for sure. But the raised beds make that much more easily. We want to create beds that are going to allow freedom for the root systems to grow in the soil. Okay, so we want some good drainage. We want beds that are easy to irrigate and, like we said before, that are accessible to the gardeners that will be working in the garden. And there's always the opportunity to be creative. Your raised beds can be like really, really super nice and expensive, or very basic. Okay, the sizes of our raised beds, we want a minimum of 3 by 3, okay, for optimal plant synergy and the garden versatility. Once they get a little bit smaller than that, sometimes the beds will get crowded. They're larger plants like zucchinis and certain squashes and stuff will have a tendency to just fall out of the garden bed, and you know sometimes they will break. So a nice 3 by 3 would be, if you have that, and would be a minimum size. Beds that are larger than 4 feet wide are difficult to work in, even if they're in the ground. Believe me, I've worked in both. But a 4 foot, a bed that is larger than 4 feet wide is difficult to work in. Okay. All right, so I did my backyard over a few years ago. This is what they looked like before. So they're 4 by 8. So I have 4 of those. So that's what my vegetable garden looks like. Well, it's filled up now, but anyway. Create some path space. Sometimes we don't think about the path space until we're actually trying to work in the garden. We need to allow enough room to work. And if you're going to be using a wheelbarrow in between your beds, my garden is on a slope, so I don't use a wheelbarrow. So I can kind of get my beds a little bit more, a little closer together. But we kind of like a 2 foot minimum is probably good, and 3 feet wide if you want to roll your wheelbarrow. So this image on the right, these paths are wide enough to work in, but not wide enough to get a wheelbarrow in between. Okay, so just take that into consideration. Your path spaces should be porous, so we're not going to be concreting our path spaces. You can keep your path spaces neat and tidy and porous. But if you have grass, if you still have grass, you can just mow it and keep it just the way it is. You can install stepping stones that allow for the water to drain through. You can use gravel, you can use chips. In the garden that we created in Pacifica, we were on a soccer field. And so we just put the beds right on the soccer field. And so our pad spaces are lawn. We don't irrigate the lawn during the summer months, but that was the easiest thing for us to do. It was very, very inexpensive. And like I said, we don't really even maintain it. We mow it when it's raining and we just let them go in the summer months. The materials for raised beds, lots of people ask, like, can we make raised? You can make a raised bed out just about, yeah, with numerous things, right? With just about anything. But the best materials for our raised beds are going to be untreated lumber or redwood or cedar. Those are going to be lasting quite a bit longer. You can make them out of natural stone, interlocking landscape blocks, and recycled materials like urbanite, like this garden bed here on the right, or reclaimed untreated lumber. I've made garden beds out of old fence boards before. The beds tend not to last as long as, say, like a 2x12 or a 2x6 bed. But if this is your first attempt at a garden, and you have some recycled materials, it's a great way to get started. So optimally, your beds, if you create new beds, you need to have them screened on the bottom. So they are a box with open at the bottom and open at the top. You're going to screen the bottom with 1/2 inch, and I'm going to say this, 1/2 inch 19 gauge galvanized hardware cloth. It's a mesh. It's a very durable mesh, and it's 1/2 inch mesh, and so the little gophers can't get through, and it works really, really well. There's another product out there that's the 1/2 inch galvanized hex gopher wire, which I've used as well. Its lifespan is not as long as the hardware cloth. It's a little bit easier to use when you first start making beds. You'll go, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this? The gopher wire is a little bit easier to use. The hardware cloth, you definitely need to wear gloves. You need tin snips. You need really good staples and that kind of thing to attach it. I want to say avoid regular chicken wire. Okay, so regular chicken wire is a 1 inch hex, and that seems like it would be fine, but the baby gophers can get in, and once a baby gopher gets into your garden bed, they'll be eating everything. Okay. Okay, so the size of your beds in terms of height, anywhere from between 12 inches to 24 inches. If you're creating ADA beds for disabled people, they'll be even taller than that. Anything lower than 12 inches is, unfortunately, the little gophers can actually jump into a bed that is less than 12 inches tall, and I've seen it happen. So I know it actually unfortunately can happen. Taller beds seem to be easier to work in, but keep in mind the taller the bed, the more soil that you're going to need. And so, depending on where you're going to get your soil or how much soil you have, it can be a lot of soil. Okay, and the taller the bed, the more water it's going to take to keep the soil moist. So keep all that in mind. We want to avoid treated materials, and especially pressure treated wood made prior to 2004. And even in San Mateo County, the Office of Sustainability is actually recommending that you don't use any a pressure treated wood, whether no matter when it was made, okay, because of the potential for contamination of the water system. So keep that in mind. Avoid using railroad ties. They have a lot of creosote in them, which is also toxic. Old tires. There's kind of an ongoing debate about whether or not old tires can, produce, can create toxicity in your vegetables. I personally just like to not use them. Obviously painted or other treated woods. And I do avoid using plastic as much as possible. I do have a few flowers planted in plastics, but all of my edible stuff that I use in pots and stuff are not plastic. When we place our beds, we want to make sure that our beds are placed directly on the ground. Okay, we do not want to place our beds on a um, a, a, um, a concrete or decks or anything like this. This little image here of this bed, very very crowded bed on a bricked patio is something that we do not want to do. Right, the water runoff. It's just a lot of waste of water, and obviously we want to avoid that. So if you are not going to do raised beds and you have a lovely backyard that you just want to dig in, or a lawn that you just want to, like cut out a place of it, scoop out the lawn and create a vegetable garden, it's great. That's what we did in the garden. This image on the right is an older image where you can see where we have beds that are dug right into the soccer field, and our paths are, in fact, mowed lawn. It's inexpensive, they last long. The plant root systems have plenty of opportunity to access the soil. They can grow wherever they want to. In-ground beds are much easier to integrate into an ornamental garden design because they don't have to be rectilinear. I mean, you can make them curved. In permaculture, we talk about a keyhole garden, which is kind of integrated throughout the ornamental plants as well. So for large gardens, this might be something that really works for you. Disadvantages of the in-ground beds is that depending on the soil that you have, you're going to be you may be spending some time doing quite a bit of soil improvement. If you have a lot of clay soil, you're going to be looking at trying to grow organic matter into the soil. So with your cover crops during the winter and adding quite a bit of compost. Okay. If you also have compacted soil or soil that has not been cared for, had anything growing on it for a while, you will probably need to do some digging. And these days, we want to minimize the amount of disruption and digging and quote tilling as much as possible. In regenerative farming, that's becoming a practice where we minimize the amount of disruption to the soil. But when we're first starting and we're just starting a new a garden that has not had anything growing in it for a very long time, or if ever, or we know the soil is of poor quality, we don't have a lot of organic matter in it, we are going to have to loosen things up. This image on the right is the example of double digging. Okay. Again, it's something that we wouldn't do on a regular basis once we had good soil tilth. But from the beginning, it could be a little bit of work. Okay. Gophers. Now, I don't know how many, like, if you all have a lot of gopher problems in Sunnyvale, but we have tons of gopher problems in San Mateo County. In a regular in-ground bed, they're a little bit more difficult to control. And they can be, like I said, they can be challenging for people who have physical limitations. Um, containers. Container gardening is its own whole method, but I do want to touch on it lightly just so that we know the differences between growing in either a large raised bed or an in-ground bed. The advantages of a container garden are that edible gardens can be created in small spaces. So if you live in an apartment and that's all you have, then then container gardening is a great way to grow some of your own food and your herbs and perhaps some flowers. It's going to allow for more physical accessibility to the gardener. Pretty easy to control gophers and moles. That said, if you have cats and dogs, they tend to like wander by the strawberries, oh, I don't know, in the morning and just, harvest strawberries for themselves. So there's always that to take into consideration. I like using containers for my herbs, and that's mostly where I do have my herbs. Um, Other things that can be grown in containers, I have small fruit trees, a lemon and a lime tree that are in a big container on my deck. Some leaf vegetables will do well in larger containers. And if you've never done any gardening at all and you have a space to start a small container garden, this is a great way to begin edible gardening. Some disadvantages of container gardens. This image on the right is actually my patio where I have all my herbs. But Containers and small beds sitting on non-porous or concrete patios are less water efficient, and so we do have to be aware of how we're going to water them. I have all my pots sitting on gravel. All right, so they don't actually. I have a non-porous patio area. I just have a couple of large stepping stones. Um, Container gardens are going to require more nutrients, as in like compost and fertilizers, because uh, the container itself is smaller and the root systems don't have the ability to grow wherever they want. You're going to need to be adding more nutrients like compost and some fertilizers. Ceramic and clay pots, wine barrels, and wooden planters are going to allow for more air circulation. So those are good choices. Plastic pots are lighter. They do hold water, but they don't last as long. And again, there's that issue of plastic. So, and then what do you do with the plastic pot when it breaks down? That's always a consideration. Grow bags are available. A lot of them they're made out of recycled plastic bottles. I tried planting. I did an experiment a couple of years ago. I planted all different kinds of things in the grow bags. They tend to dry out quickly. For some herbs, they're pretty good. But for things like zucchini that need and even tomatoes that need a little bit more water, they tend to dry out more quickly. So I don't use them for those types of crops. So whatever you choose, create your beds that are going to allow freedom for root systems, are accessible to the gardener, have good drainage, are easy to irrigate, okay, and start from the very beginning to implement water-wise strategies. This bed on the right here is a creation at the Big Garden at Pacifica Gardens. It's an herb spiral that we built out of urbanite. We had an AmeriCorps team in 2015 that helped us with that. So that's something that you can like be really creative with. Before you start planting your garden, put a watering plan in place. Ask yourself, how am I going to water this? Okay, where's the hose? If that's what you're going to use, how far away is it, etc. For your backyard gardens, consider drip irrigation if you can afford it. Soaker hoses will also work, and then hand watering. Okay, or a combination. Sometimes, depending on the season and if it's like hot one day, cold the next, sometimes a combination of the two can actually help conserve water. Things like overhead sprinklers, manual and automatic, are prone to water waste. So we want to avoid those. And I think that that's pretty common knowledge now, especially with our basic landscaping. We want to minimize the use of sprinklers that will actually waste water. So, before we go talk about soil preparation, do we have any questions based on what we just talked about?
We have one question in Q&A, but the question is for uh, when, where on your website will the recording be available? So it will be on Basca's YouTube channel, and I will also send a follow-up email after the webinar to it will include the recording of this webinar. And does anyone have any question about um, preparing? Okay, we have another question. What vegetables are best for container gardening?
Okay, so for container gardening, you so those would be the ones that don't have really big root systems. So lettuces do well, spinach does well. I've done kale. Cherry tomatoes do well. Um, Peas, actually, it's a very funny thing, but peas do well. Just use a like a tomato cage to so that they can wander up. Let's see what else. Small onions, like bunching onions, will do well. All the herbs, like all the culinary herbs, so chives and thyme and marjoram, cilantro, all of those can do very well in a container garden. And I actually plant my strawberries in pots as well. They do really well. Things you want to avoid putting in a container. Well, I mean, huge containers, you can actually grow some of these other things. But if you think of things like zucchini, summer squash, crookneck yellow, or other squashes, they tend to, unless you have a really big a container, they tend not to do very well. They produce very small fruit. Cucumbers, a smaller cucumber can do okay in a container garden, but I have found that they do much better in a larger bed. Things that you probably don't want to put into a container are big crawling things like pumpkins, okay, or melons. Um, you could probably do peppers. I don't grow peppers because it's not warm enough here on the coast side, but you can probably do peppers, especially the smaller peppers like chili peppers, Thai peppers, things like that. Does that help?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's help. It does help for me. Another question um, is what kind of containers do you recommend?
Um, like for container gardening, yeah. I'm kind of biased. I use big terracotta pots, and I know ceramic pots are going to be more water wise, but I got used to these the big terracotta pots. It was just easier for me. I live in a on the coast, and they work pretty well. Big ceramic pots are, as you know, pretty expensive. You can build containers out of reclaimed lumber pretty easily and put them on your deck. I've done that before too. Old fence boards, and just as long as they're not treated, you can build boxes. They're it's pretty straightforward. I also use on my deck too. I have two very large galvanized tubs that I got from the feed and fuel store. Those also do really well. You just need to make sure that you drill pretty big holes in them so that you have drainage. And again, don't set them on a non-porous patio. You don't want water going everywhere. Try to set them on a place, a patio that actually has that's porous, so that the water will go down into the ground system. Yeah, so uh, like I said, I try to avoid plastic. The least expensive way to go is to try to buy reclaimed lumber, find reclaimed lumber and build some boxes, or use the galvanized ones.
Thank you. Um, I do have a question. So if I started my garden in like using container, can I later if I want to move them to raised bed, how can I do it?
Yeah, yeah. So, if you're planting right now in containers, then mostly those things will be your perennials. So, like your herbs and maybe even some of your flowers. Once you plant an annual plant into a container, you pretty much have to just let it live out its life and then replant it. Okay,
Mhm.
but herbs and even strawberries and some of the other perennial flowers and stuff are natives. They're easily transplanted into a regular garden bed at some point. It's a little bit of an effort depending on how big the root ball is, but you can easily do it. Mhm.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any question for now.
Okay.
Um, yeah, so we can go continue. If you have any question, feel free to put it in the Q&A.
Okay, great. So we'll talk a little bit about soil and soil preparation for the garden, and then this is where I kind of get on my soapbox about compost. So that'll be fun. Okay. So we a lot of times we talk about, well, what kind of soil should I, use or whatever. All right. So if we're when we hear that, we know that we're talking about either a container garden or we're talking about raised beds, and we'll talk about that in a second. But wherever we garden, we want to make sure that our soil has plenty of organic matter and living organisms. Sometimes we think about soil as this inert kind of thing, but it's not. It really is it's a living thing, and the sooner our soil is living, the better our plants will be, the more nutritious our vegetables will be, and it'll be the best way to optimize water usage in our garden. So, um, improving the condition of our soil is going to be an important part of our gardening, and the goal here is to create living soil. So some of you are already gardeners, so you know that there are different kinds of soil particles. We talk about sandy soil or silt or clay. The best garden soil is going to be a mixture of sand, silt, and clay at slightly different percentages. Sand about 30 to 50%, 30 to 50% silt, and 20 to 30% clay. If you end up with a lot of clay, that is going to be, well, it's sort of like the good news and the bad news. The thing about clay soil is it holds nutrients really well. However, it can get dried out and be compacted, and it can be difficult to work with. But it can be done. So, fear not, you can actually work with clay soil. In addition to a mixture of the soil particles, we're looking at soil that has approximately 5 to 10% or even more, especially with our raised beds, of organic matter. The organic matter is what's going to be holding the water. It's going to bind our soil particles together and create a living structure. And we're talking about soil structure that is going to optimize water retention, create enough pore space for air, and then optimize the transfer of nutrients to our plants. For if you're digging in-ground beds, here's me double digging about a decade ago. Um, we need to examine the soil. There's lots of different ways, and we actually don't have time to determine, but you can easily like Google it. There's stuff out there to examine your soil manually. You don't necessarily have to test it unless you want to. But try to examine your soil to determine whether or not you have clay, silt, or sand. Again, you may want to test it for organic matter and then general nutrient content. In my own backyard garden, when I purchased high quality bed soil, I didn't test it. I knew that it was good, clean, organic soil, so I didn't test it. When we built the big garden, we had an entire soccer field, and so we tested it. We tested it for drainage. We tested it for toxic chemicals, especially lead, and then of course nutrient levels. So it just really depends on what type of bed you're creating, or what type of garden you're creating. Okay. If you are in ground, you're going to need to, like we said before, you need to break up the compaction. And this is where the digging down and the double digging technique up to 24 inches actually is a good thing to do. Again, we don't want to do it more than one or two times. We want to, once we start creating a soil food web where we have lots of soil biology. We don't want to be digging it up, okay? But initially, when we have virtually little of it, we'll have to do some of that. And then we're going to actually add about an inch of organic compost to the top, and then kind of just loosely stir it into the bed. So for raised beds, this is always a good question. Where do I get the soil? I buy my, I when I fill our beds up, I buy soil from a very reputable garden supply place. It's a little on the pricey side, but I know that it has been tested for contaminants. It also has been quote manufactured, so it has the ideal percentages of soil, silt, and clay, and then also it has organic matter already added to it. So these are things that you can look into, and I'm sure that there's very reputable gardening stores and places in the Sunnyvale area that you can get some soil from. Okay. So new raised beds with new topsoil are still going to need improvement. Okay, in terms of building up the soil biology again. So we talked about adding compost, right? And so that will bring in the bacteria, the fungi, and the earthworms. So we still have to do that, even if we have kind of like a good soil or good topsoil. Okay. Once the bed is put together, we really won't have to do much digging. Okay. This bed on the right is the type of bed that we have at the big garden. We have 20-foot beds. These beds are 20 feet long by 4 feet wide. They hold 5 yards of soil. So probably not, probably you won't build anything quite this large, but this is an example of what we have. For the pots and small containers, you can, and I recommend that you use a really good quality um, uh, soil mix, purchase soil mix, specifically for container gardening. And there's plenty of them that are certified CCOF for organic gardening. If you choose not to do that, totally fine. You can actually make your own container soil with, if you have just some sandy loam, you can actually get bagged sandy loam if you want, and then add half compost. So you can see where you have way more compost to ratio to soil in your container gardening soil than you do in your regular bed soil. Okay. And as we already mentioned, container gardening is going to require more compost and organic fertilizer because we of the limited root space. I want to talk just a second about organic amendments. In organic gardening, most of us already know this. We're going to try our very best to only use organic fertilizers. Once you get your bed and your soil in good shape by using some good practices in terms of composting and mulching, you will find most likely that you need less and less fertilizer. If you're starting out at the very beginning, say with a brand new raised bed, you got some sandy loam, you've got an inch or so of compost, before you plant, it's probably a good idea to amend the soil according to the box, because it'll actually give you so many cups per however many square feet in the spring. You may or may not need it again in the fall, but usually it's pretty good in the spring. Over fertilizing is one thing that new gardeners, unfortunately, will often do. So we want to avoid like, oh, I'm going to put an inch of compost and then I'm going to put in, 10 cups of alfalfa meal and then I'm going to add chicken manure. All of these things are, well, we've all done it, believe me. I mean, I had like the giant beanstalk growing the first year I had because I over fertilized. But over fertilizing is going to give you big plants. It actually unfortunately, one of the toxins that we find in our water system is actually excessive nitrogen from excessive nitrogen fertilization. So we want to make sure that we only use organic fertilizers to avoid that. Okay. Other things that you can do at home, and this is in my own backyard. I don't apply any box fertilizers with the exception of my lemon and lime tree. because I have a composting system in my house, not in my house, in my backyard, along with a vermiculture, a worm bin. So I use those as my primary sources for adding nutrients to my garden over the year. So once you create your bed, okay, we want to make sure that, I mean, like your soil is the like really super important and we want to protect it. So garden bed soil should not be exposed for very long or left open. So a bed that doesn't have anything planted in it means that the soil biology in that bed is now going to die. So you really want to keep it moist and you want to keep it covered and you want to get it planted as soon as possible. So here's an example of where cover cropping could come in. And I think most of us kind of understand what a cover crop is. A cover crop is a planting of some kind that is just going to occupy the soil and grow in the soil and keep the soil biology alive. Typical type cover crops can include some legumes like fava beans, sometimes grains, sometimes mustard. There's lots of varieties of cover crops. And so, if you know, for instance, that you're not going to grow a winter garden, as soon as you harvest your last plant out of your summer garden, plant cover crop, let it grow all winter long. Okay, so empty beds are going to lose moisture, and when the bed dries out, we have loss of the living organisms, and we have the breakdown of the soil structure that you've worked really hard to put together. Okay? And mulch. Okay, so there's this slide appears again. So mulch is going to be really, really important. And so have plenty of organic matter on hand. Make sure that it's free from pesticides and herbicides. So gathering mulch from a place where you know gets sprayed with pesticides or herbicides probably not a good idea. But if you yourself have trees in your backyard or out in front that you know are going to drop leaves. Don't put them in your green bins. Save them, and you can use them as mulch. Put them in big old garbage cans, or create a space for them. Or you can also compost them. So straw is another good thing. If you have to purchase straw, rice straw is preferred, but any kind of straw will do. And like I said, your leaves, pine straw or pine needles also is a good mulch. Coconut coir is again very good, but you have to purchase it. So it's if we're thinking about trying to minimize our impact in terms of shipping things and food miles and compost miles and all those types of things, using things that are on hand is going to be best. We're looking at trying to, after we plant, a good 2 to 3 inches of mulch is going to hold the water in the warmer months and then just keep the soil warm for us in the cooler months. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about composting. As I recall, about half of everybody's using compost. I encourage you to make your own compost. This is the best compost because it will be living. Okay, so composting in your own backyard is the number one thing that you can do to improve your soil, create living soil, and grow healthy vegetables. And plus, it saves water. Okay. I know that there are lots of ways that you can get compost from other green waste facilities, which is fine, a good place to start if you don't have any other options. But that compost is usually does not have any soil biology in it because it has to be heated to kill pathogens. So just keep that in mind. Home composting is going to reduce waste. Okay, so nobody has to ship it away. You just take it out to your backyard and compost it. Home compost is full of our beneficial organisms, as we said, bacteria, fungi, and then earthworms. And it also is going to allow you to select the materials for your compost piles. And I'm thinking, why did I even say that, right? So the best compost is going to be a compost that is going to have a diverse a diversity in its components. So not just straw, not just leaves, but maybe leaves and straw, maybe corn stalks, maybe sunflower stalks as part of like your browns, right? And then for your greens, your crop residue at the end of the season, or maybe you're growing some fava beans or whatever. So you actually have the ability to control that, and you also then can control and avoid toxins from entering into your compost system. Okay, it really is easy once you get started. And I asked Claire to look up, and she did. So there are a couple of several composting workshops in the Sunnyvale area this year, and the next one is coming up on April 12th. And there's a link here for where you can register. Okay, so if you don't know how to compost and you haven't been doing your own home composting, I highly recommend it. It really is easier than you think. And once you get started and you get in the habit of collecting and keeping your organic matter, both your kitchen scraps and your lawn clippings and your leaves, and composting them, it's yeah, it'll be pretty simple, and you won't understand why you didn't do it before. So, in the nutshell, compost is just decomposed organic matter. Okay, so it's going to be the natural process of recycling organic material, all right, leaves and vegetable scraps, and we call it black gold. And like I said, once you start doing your own composting and using it in your garden, you really will not need to use a lot of other additional fertilizers. Good compost provides nitrogen and carbon and other nutrients to grow healthy organic vegetables, and it reduces the needs for chemical fertilizers. Again, we want to reduce the use of chemical fertilizers because we do not want to pollute our waterways. Okay. Compost is going to improve our soil, and the better soil we have, the healthier plants we're going to have. Okay, so let's talk about the crops. Okay, so are there any questions on compost? Right, where am I going to get if I'm starting my vegetable garden for the first time, say tomorrow, right? Where am I going to get compost? Okay, so I recommend that you go to a reputable garden supply place, and they very often will have compost that is certified organic for food usage. So look and make sure that the compost that you purchase actually is certified. Okay, there's lots of different ways to make compost, just with all of the debris, right? And if it has been sprayed, that will be unfortunately mixed into your compost. Okay. I highly recommend. There's a couple of places. There's Lingso. They do a great job. They have some great composts that are certified for vegetable gardening. I'm sure that there is a garden supply place down in Sunnyvale that is equally as reputable. And just to get you started, and then start composting tomorrow. If you want to garden this year, start composting right now. Okay, learn how to do that. So I strongly encourage you to do that. Okay. All right, so let's talk about vegetables, right? That's why you're here. And we'll talk about, we may not have time to talk too much about crops for pollinators and sustainability, but I hope so because it makes it fun. Grow what you like to eat. This is the common thing. It seems kind of like, pretty basic. But sometimes, people will go, well, I have to grow the blah, 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 and I'm like, why? I don't know. Someone told me to. I hate them. I don't want to eat it. So, but grow what you like to eat. Grow the vegetables at the right time of the year. So you're in Sunnyvale. So you have a distinct warm time of the year, which is April to September. That's the warm growing season. Then you have the fall, which starts a little bit later in September, and then you have early spring. So you'll be growing all these warm weather vegetables during between April and September. The cool weather crops, although sometimes you can grow them, you have to kind of maybe amend the situation a little bit, provide some shade net. But your brassica and all of those types of things are going to be a little bit more difficult to grow in the middle of the summer, right? But man, you can grow tomatoes, you can grow melons, you can grow cucumbers, you can grow, zucchini, you can grow, all kinds of really cool stuff. And then the broccoli, the kale, and everything like that, you can grow in the wintertime. Okay. And we say like keep the crops to the proper scale to to your size of your garden. If you have a really small garden, it's probably not a good idea to plant, a watermelon plant, okay? Because those things take a lot of space. Same thing with pumpkins. Okay. Again, like we said, grow what you like to eat. If you don't like kale, don't grow it. Okay. But that said, sometimes you'll grow something that you think is yuck, whatever, and then you taste it. And once you've eaten it for the very first time, you think, oh my gosh, homegrown broccoli, way different from the broccoli that's been sitting on the grocery shelf for gosh knows how many weeks. So it's always, venture out if you want to, but definitely choose what you want to grow. Again, we just talked a little bit about the warm weather crops versus the cool weather crops. Your warm weather crops are going to be tomatoes, peppers, melons, corn. Corn's a good one. Squash, beans. Okay, all planted during the main growing season, and then your cool weather crops planted later in the fall, late September, early October, and then again for some of the early spring things like lettuce and even snap peas or regular peas can be planted in the spring. Okay. When you're selecting your vegetables, in order to save water, start looking for the maturity time. So you'll see on tomatoes, some tomato varieties will mature in 70 days versus 90 days or 120 days. So if you think of a small cherry tomato that's going to mature in 70 days, you know that you're going to have tomatoes earlier than you thought you would have. So that's a good thing too. But that plant will take less water to actually yield the fruit that you want. So kind of think about that as well. And we already talked about keeping them to scale. Okay, so pumpkins, although fun, right? I will say something about pumpkins and some of these larger vining kind of things. They're not particularly water wise. Okay, pumpkins, watermelon, by definition, filled with water, all right, can take a bit of water. And so if you do grow those, just be really careful and make sure that you do mulch, okay, and that you water at the right time of the day. Okay. All right, so here are the warm weather crops. Okay, I would say basil. All right, so beans. In Sunnyvale area, you can grow basic green beans and then also dry beans. So if you have, if you want to grow black beans or pinto beans or cannellini, those you can grow all those in your climate. Carrots, corn. I mean, carrots pretty much can be grown all year round. This long list of things that we normally see, cucumbers, garlic, grains, etc. Those are all considered warm weather crops. I want to say and note one time before we move on to the next slide that the on squash, so summer squash is like zucchini and yellow squash, those little brown little pancake patty pan kind of squashes. But then there's winter squashes, and winter squashes are butternut squash, which would grow great in Sunnyvale, acorn squash, and of course then pumpkins as well. Those still all, even though we consider them to be winter squash, they need to be planted in the spring at the same time, right? Because they are going to grow through the entire season, right? And you're going to harvest them in the fall. Okay. So just want to, because sometimes when we first start gardening, we think, oh, winter squash, I'm going to plant it in winter. No, you're going to harvest it in winter. You're going to plant it in the spring. Okay. All right, so cool weather crops. So we talk about the right plant at the right time. If you're in a warmer climate, like all y'all are, planting these vegetables, say in June, is not the optimal time for them. They'll be difficult to grow. So getting them planted earlier, like February, March, you can, with your like lettuce and peas, those are really good. Your potatoes will go in March. Salad mixes, spinaches, those will all are really good in the early spring. And then again, if you want to plant them in the fall, when the soil temperature goes down, when the daytime high is now down below 80, or even hopefully more like in the 70s, they'll do much better then. Okay. And I don't necessarily recommend that you plan for a year-round harvest if this is your first garden, but just so you know, a place where you can go. We just talked about a way that you could have a year-round garden. So your main growing season, April to September, and then at the end of the year, you can plant some of those cool weather crops and then have them growing throughout the winter. We live in California. And we don't really ever get a lot of snow. We don't get a lot of freezing temperatures. So we can have kale and collards and broccoli and cauliflower and lettuces, spinach, chard, beets. We can have those growing throughout the winter. So it's really rewarding to be able to go out in like December and go harvest a chard or something like that. It's very fun. So things to consider down the road. Like I said, I wouldn't necessarily plan for a year-round garden when we're first planting. Let me check on my time here. I just want to make sure we have another hour or so. So that's pretty good. So I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about planting for pollinators. As we know, okay, we actually need pollinators in order to produce food. Okay, so crops that are gonna or plants that are gonna attract pollinators and create habitat for beneficial insects will improve your food production. And just the primary example that I see very often is new gardeners who plant squash is a typical situation, or pumpkins. And if you notice on squash, it has flowers, right? They produce this beautiful yellow flower. But produces two kinds of flowers. It produces a male flower and a female flower. The male flower sticks up, okay, and attracts the bee or the beneficial insect. The beneficial insect kind of gets in there and rolls around and then goes down to the next flower. Well, the female flower is right below it, right? The little insect goes down there and pollinates that flower. Um, that is required in order for you to get fruit. So if you don't have beneficial insects like bees or even like little beneficial flies and other insects, pollination is going to be problematic. So my general planting rule is I plant my squash, I plant borage, all right? And I plant borage because it's easy to grow. But anything that has a blue flower will attract a bee for sure. And borage is one of those. So your rosemary, okay, some of the thyme, some herbs and that kind of thing, they'll all attract bees and beneficial insects. Okay. So again, scientists estimate that about 75% of the world's flowering plants and about 35% of the world's food crops depend on animal pollinators to produce. Okay. Those animals are our little bees, okay, and our insects. So when you're making your plan and planning your garden, allow some space for some plants that are going to attract pollinators. Annual flowers like alyssum, bachelor buttons, calendula, okay, daisies, marigolds, and sunflowers are all good candidates. Also native plants. In our area, poppies just grow, very, very well. In fact, the image behind me is our poppies grown at the big garden that I manage. Also, too, yarrow, which is a native, also grows very well and will attract lots of beneficial insects. Something called bee plant attracts, well, bees and Cleveland sage or any sages. Sages also produce a lovely blue purple flower that attract insects. So native plants are going to attract native bees, right? So sometimes we think, oh, I have a small space, maybe I need a beehive. You don't. You just need to plant plants that are going to attract native bees, okay? And obviously, it's an excellent way to enhance your garden. So certain things are going to help us with natural pest control. And those are mostly going to be our fragrant herbs like basil, chives, dill, and mints. So if you have space, I actually, like I said, my herbs are all planted in pots and I kind of move them around sometimes. Mints are particularly good. If you do plant mints, make sure that you do contain them because if you put them in your garden bed, eventually they'll invade the entire bed. I've done that before, so this I know. And so put them in pots. You can let your annual flowers and herbs go to seed. Once you let them go to seed, they will attract pollinators. Well, as I mentioned to Claire, like cilantro. Cilantro is a great herb to grow. It's fun to add to your food and everything, but it's a fast growing annual and it bolts pretty quickly. So succession planting for things like cilantro is always a good thing. Make sure you have like, 3 or 4 weeks later, you plant another plant if you want a constant flow of cilantro for your cooking. But if you just let it go to seed, then it adds, the component of attracting pollinators. Lots of different kinds of wildflowers will help attract pollinators. I've just mentioned quite a few of them. Sunflowers are really, really good. Sunflowers perform like a dual duty for bee and insect attraction, but then also to the stalks are great materials for your compost. This is just a real quick here. I have a very wild front yard. My front yard is where my fruit trees are. This is a combination of natives, calendula. There's bees everywhere. I never have any problem at all with pollination, and we have excellent fruit production, and we have very, very minimal pests. I mean, I've never added anything, had to add anything or spray anything for my apples and pears. So just to let you know if you incorporate some of these plants into your edible garden. Not only are they fun, pretty, and everything, but they actually provide quite a bit of benefit to the garden. This is the other side of it, very wild looking. So, if while you're planning, again, the first year or so that you're planting, you're just really kind of focusing on like, okay, the mechanics of doing a lot of things. But as you move on and have success, consider planting for sustainability. Okay, that's a big word and means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But consider planting crops that you can use for your compost system because hopefully I've persuaded you to actually start your own composting. So consider planting plants that will help with that composting system. I just mentioned sunflowers. Sunflowers are awesome. They tick the box on several things. The sunflower stalks are really, really good for your compost. You just need to, at the end of the season, you need to cut them small and put them in your compost as the part of the um, uh, the dried part, okay, or the browns, right? Corn is great, or the corn stalks also really, really good. Fava beans make a really nice stock, and fava beans are a great addition to the garden for sustainability. Cover crop mixes and grains. There are the seed companies, almost all the seed companies right now sell cover crop mixes where it's a combination of a couple of legumes like fava beans or Austrian peas or vetch or something like that. And then they'll have a grain or two. Grains are really good for your as a cover crop because not only does the grain provide the carbon necessary for your compost, right? But grains grow pretty deep, and so you will actually be growing carbon into your soil. So those are some good choices for that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit. So any question on the composting idea or what's the difference between a warm weather crop and a cool weather crop? We'll talk a little bit more about some timing. I'm going to show you a planting schedule and let's see, and planting for sustainability. Any questions along those lines?
Yes, we have some question about our raised bed and container garden. So
Okay.
one question is that Anne says I'm a very new gardener for raised bed or container garden. What is the smallest width I could reasonably use? If I put a raised bed garden or container garden along the length of the fence and it's 1 foot in width. Is that enough room?
Okay, so when we first started talking about like putting in raised beds, optimally it would be best if it could be as wide as possible. 1 foot wide. I don't know how tall it is, but 1 foot wide is going to certainly you can grow things absolutely, but it's going to limit the size of the plant that you can grow in there. So a 1 foot wide is probably not going to give you the best space for maybe your tomatoes or your squashes, but certainly smaller plants can go in there. So your lettuces and kales and spinach and bunching onions and radishes and beets and all those things. The smaller root systems can go in there. If you're creating and you have the space, the minimum width would be 3 feet. If you can get a 3 foot by 3 foot bed by 12, 14 inches high or even higher, maybe 18 inches, that would be great. But that said, we've all grown things in smaller things. Uh, the um, the size of a pot or container, I usually try not to grow anything that's less than about 16 or 18 inches. Okay. When they get too small, the root systems, even with the herbs, sometimes I plant, thyme in a really small pot, and I realize, within a couple of months it's outgrown it, and for some reason now it's actually, kind of stagnant. All right, it stops growing. So the bigger, the better. Okay.
Okay, thank you. The next question is about soil and compost. So Jan asked, where do you buy dirt and which company did you use to test your soil? Also, can you give us can you give us the name of soil? That would be really helpful.
Okay. All right. Am I allowed to call out where I buy my stuff?
Yeah,
Okay. All right. I live in San Mateo County, and so it is not probably very practical for you, but I do all of my soil shopping and at Lingso Garden Supplies and Garden Supply, and they have a soil that is it's called the vegetable soil mix, and in that and that soil mix is a sandy loam, and it also has some compost in it, and it also has added organic matter, so it has fir bark in it, and it is actually certified for organic gardening. Okay, that's the one that I buy when I need it for, like, so we had new beds installed at the garden. I just bought 15 yards of it. Okay, so that's what I recommend for the beds. That said, a similar product might be closer to you and available at in the Sunnyvale area. But I would look around, and then if you do find some, say, oh yeah, we can deliver, yards of it to your house or whatever, make sure you know what's in it. Okay. And when I have to buy compost, I buy compost from Linkso, but most of the time I make my own compost. Okay. Did that answer the question?
yeah, great.
Okay.
I have a question. Is that a difference between certified organic gardening and certified organic compost? Because Sunnyvale, we offer free compost to our residents,
Mhm.
and they are made from local yard waste and is certified organic by the U.S.
Oh,
Composting Council. So I'm wondering if that's okay for organic gardening.
absolutely. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. If it's been certified by an entity as organic and and safe for vegetable gardening, that's outstanding. Yes, of course. Hmm.
Okay, so that provides another option for residents to get compost.
Yeah.
And yeah, okay. And the next question, we have another question. Also, where would be a good place to buy rice straw?
Okay, so yeah, again, I live on the coast, right? I buy 'em when I buy straw, I buy it from Half Moon Bay Feed and Fuel. So I'm part of a farming community. So I'm where, yeah, so that's where I know I can get rice straw in your area. I would, yeah. Oof. I don't know. There must be farm supply places in Sunnyvale area somewhere. I mean, that's where I would go. Look for farm supply place. Ah, shoot, I wish I knew that. I'm sorry.
No worries. Next question. What does certified for compost mean?
I'm organic certified. So what that means is that there has been a certifying agency has tested the compost for pesticide, residue, for toxicity, so that basically they're indicating to the consumer that this particular compost or this particular garden soil is safe for for gardening. Okay. So sometimes, you have a friend go, hey, I'm building a new like ADU on my property and I just excavated out my soil. Do you want any of it? Okay, so I mean, it might be great soil, but you have no idea really, what's in it, right? And I'm not saying don't use it, but I'm saying that if you're going to use that, then you're definitely going to want to test it. So for like where to go to have things tested, I would go to the Santa Clara County or the Santa Clara Master Gardener website, and they should have a list of local people that can help you with soil testing. I say that because I know that the San Mateo County website has that. And if it doesn't, right? If you don't see a list there, the Santa Clara County Master Gardener website will have a link or a question thing that says "Ask a Master Gardener." Fill out that thing and say, where's the list of reputable soil testing companies in my area? And you should get some information from them. Does that help?
Great. Does that also means the same thing for compost, certified compost?
They may. They may. But they probably they may or may not actually have it on the website. If you can't find it sounds to me like Sunnyvale has a good option for a compost that's certified either organic or for safe for vegetable gardening. But if it doesn't, just ask them. I know because I'm on the helpline in San Mateo County, so I know that there will be a master gardener in Santa Clara County that will research that for you and get back to you on it.
Great. Thank you. And then next questions. Squirrels come to my backyard every day and they dig my containers. Are there any solution to avoid them?
Oh, squirrels, I know. They're cute and they're problematic. Yeah. Yeah, the only way I have found to keep a squirrel out of my big pots, and they don't tend to bother my herbs, but they love to steal my strawberries. The only way that I have found to be able to do that is in a container, get or either that or create one, a tomato cage, put it tomato cage on it and over it, and then you need to wrap the cage. All right, you can either wrap the cage with mesh that's smaller than the squirrel, or you can wrap it with row cover. So there's lots of different types of row cover. Agrabah is a brand name that we use quite a bit. It's white, all right, and it will actually like create a barrier so that the little animals can't get into your containers. Yeah, they yeah, they're a thing. Yeah, I don't know. There are other things. There's some types of animal urine byproducts that people have said help. I would try it out, but the barrier method is usually the best one. So.
Thank you. And then next question. When do we start the tomato and marigold saplings? Or can we sow the seeds directly in the garden bed? If yes, then when do we start?
Okay, we're going to get to that. Okay, so yeah. I'm gonna for some of these vegetables, we are going to get transplants, and for some of those, we're going to sow the seeds right away. So we'll get to that hopefully. Make so let's yep, let's we only got a half an hour, so let's move on then. Okay, is it time to move on?
Sure.
Okay, all right. So, as I've mentioned before, or whoops, wrong way. There we go. This is like just basic kind of create a plan, draw it out, okay? And again, it doesn't have to be a work of art. And we're going to talk a little bit about in-bed spacing so that you can make sure that you have enough space for what you want to plant. Okay, so this little example here is making sure that I have enough room in my 3 by 3 bed for a couple of cucumbers, some squash, and some bush beans. It's a very small garden. Okay. All right. So I have just a couple of examples here. If I have 2 beds, one for cool weather crops, one for warm weather crops, we can just kind of like a basic thing, just draw it out, right? We know how big the snap peas are going to get, and we know how big the kale is going to get, and we can actually create, okay, a little plan for ourselves. So in this situation, we would have snap peas, kale or chard, lettuce, carrots, and in a big old large pot, a cherry tomato. In our other bed, we'll have some cucumbers, a zucchini, maybe a yellow squash, and some green beans, and perhaps some strawberries. So this would be like a really nice beginning garden. You get a chance to like test out both, cool and warm crops. So just kind of like a sample plan. And one of the things that we want to make sure is that we need to learn about the timing of the planting. Okay. And like I kind of already mentioned about the winter squashes. And let's see. Yep. Okay. So I think I've said enough of that for now. Let's have a look here. Okay. So planting. So one thing that we'll learn, the larger the seed, okay, so like big seeds like zucchinis and beans, those those plants do pretty well if you direct sow them into the garden bed. The smaller seeds, like tomato seeds, well, carrot seeds are a little bit different because they're crazy. But the smaller seeds, like tomatoes and kale and broccoli and all those, they do better if you plant them as transplants or right actually start them yourself. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about the seeds. Okay, so generally speaking, if you propagate your own seeds, okay, in small flats or small pots, you're going to save water in a huge way. First of all, I mean, like when you go out and you plant a row of seeds, and say tomato seeds or whatever, there's all different kinds of things can happen. One, you have to water the entire area. Secondly, you risk the little critters coming along, the birds or whatever, and picking out all the seeds. I can't tell you how many times that can happen. Okay, so it's going to reduce the water usage, but then also too it will improve your germination rate. Okay, and then from that you will be able to transplant your healthiest plants. If you don't want to do this, okay, which is totally understandable, you can buy high quality organic, certified organic transplants, right? So little seedlings and then transplant them into your garden. And that's a good way to do it too if this idea scares you, okay? Some people are like, yeah, it's no problem at all, okay? I want to try to do some of this, okay? So if you plant your own, if you start and propagate your own seeds, this image on the right, this is kale. It looks like curly kale. So these are kind of little right now, but they're going to be growing up, and then we'll just transplant them from this 4-inch pot into the garden. So you have more choices of vegetables. You have control over your planting schedule. Sometimes you're like, oh, you're in the nursery, and you think, oh my goodness, look at these great, chard seedlings, and you're thinking, oh, they need to be planted right now, but my garden is not prepared yet. So if you plant your own, if you start your own right now while you're preparing the garden bed, that's a good way to go because by the time you get the beds built and the garden bed filled and your compost in and all that kind of stuff, you can be growing your seedlings. That's a good way to go. again, if this is the first time you're gardening, then that might not be something that you want to try right away. But I would like at least try, growing your beans from seeds. That's pretty straightforward. Certainly, squashes are easily grown from seeds, although you can get transplants as well. So for the answer for the question about tomatoes, if you this is March, you oof, yep, you still have time. If you want to transplant your, let me just look on the schedule here. Tomatoes, it's a little bit tight on time. Yeah, but you have until June to plant tomatoes. Okay. So if you want to, if you have a nice little packet of tomato seed that you want to try, put them in one of these little flats, like I just like or a 4-inch pot like this. Space them out a little bit. Usually, there's really good instructions on the packet, and then grow up the little tomato seedling, and then you can transplant it. But it has to be the plant itself needs to have at least 2 true leaves or even more in the case of a tomato, okay? Right. So, and if you're growing your seedlings inside, which you'll probably have to, unless you have a greenhouse, you'll have to quote harden them off. So, kind of take them out in the middle of the day and then bring them back in at night, and then do that for a couple days in a row. And then that way, the little plant will acclimate to the cooler evening. Okay, and it won't kill them because sometimes if they get too cold and then they kind of they'll die. Okay. Right. So this image right here on the right, these are squash seedlings. They are planted too close together. I just want to let you know that image there, but it was a good image of what 2 true leaves look like. So this is what we call a cotyledon. This is the first kind of leaf that comes out. All right. And then it produces 2 other leaves. All right. That is the true leaf. When you have 2 true leaves and the plant is about 2 or 3 inches tall, then you can go ahead and transplant it. For the tomato, when it gets up, you'll have a couple little branches, right? You're going to transplant that very, very low. And if you buy a tomato plant that has multiple little branches, what you'll do is you'll pinch off all the lower branches until you have 3, right, little tiny branches, and then you're going to plant that very, very deep. Okay. Tomatoes do much better if we can get them planted as deep as possible. So they look kind of funny at first because, now it looks like there's only like 3 little leaves and you had this gorgeous huge plant when you bought it from the nursery, but you're going to set that puppy in pretty deep. Hopefully that helps. Okay. Your soil should be moist but not muddy. One thing that beginning gardeners often kind of like don't know about is you don't want to transplant into dry soil. Okay. So when we're talking about the proper moisture for the soil to be transplanted in, stick your hand in the soil, squeeze it a little bit. When you open up your hand, right, it should be a clump, right? Not a hard clump or anything like that, but it should be moist enough to kind of make a little bit of a clump. If when you hold it and you open your hand and the soil kind of falls all over the place, it's too dry, okay? You don't want to put a little seedling into dry soil. So moisten it up, okay? Let it sit for a few hours or maybe even to the next day, and then you can go ahead and transplant. Did I answer the question about the tomatoes?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. All right. So transplanting can be a little bit of I'm like, how am I supposed to do this? Most of us, our tendency is to want to dig a hole. I'm going to try to dissuade you from doing that because there's a really super easy way to do it. So this is me leaning into a big raised bed here. You can see that I've got a trowel that is at 45 degrees to the soil level. My little seedling, which I believe is a zucchini, is in my left hand. All right, I've taken it out of the pot. It still has a little bit of a soil ball on it. That's completely fine. All right. If when you take it out of the pot, you kind of lose some soil, don't worry about it. Okay. But just very, very gently hold the seedling right up by, I'm holding it by on the root ball, but you can actually hold it up by the leaves a little bit. you're going to take your trowel, you're going to set it in, all right, set it into the soil at 45 degrees, bring the plant behind your trowel and pull it toward you. It's going to open up the hole and the plant can actually just drop right in. I know it sounds kind of silly, but it actually really works. And you'll minimize like redigging and dig. As soon as you dig a hole, it fills in or whatever, right? And there you are, you end up planting your plant too high. This way, you have lots of control over how deep you go. Just take that trowel all the way, push it all the way in, pull it back, and then you can put your seedling in right behind it. Pull the trowel straight up. The soil will fill in right behind it, and then just gently pat it down, okay? And then water gently, okay? So that is like the best transplanting technique. I learned it 20 years ago from John Jevons when I did my internship up in Willits. So it has served me very, very well, and it works particularly well. When we're thinking about transplanting, we have to think about how close we're going to plant them, right? We talked about one of the things that for water-wise gardening, one of the most important thing is to plant the plants at the right distance from each other. If we plant them too far apart, then we have all this wasted space in there. We have exposed soil. We're watering when we don't need to be watering. Okay. So if we plant them too close, then they become crowded, right? Then we have reduced growing potential for the vegetable. Oftentimes we'll have small fruit or whatever. So we want to pay attention to how far apart to plant. It's called in-bed spacing. Okay. So it's going to depend on how big they get, right? How big their root system is and how much light and water they need. So knowing the proper spacing is going to be important. So in-bed spacing, there are in-bed spacing charts, okay? There is a great one in the California Master Gardener Handbook. Now, the California Master Gardener Handbook is about that thick. It's probably at the library. There might be some online versions of it. Yeah, so that's like the official way to get it. You can also use your Google machine, all right, so that you can determine, how far things, how far apart to plant. The John Jevons book called How to Grow More Vegetables has planting charts in it. Okay, and if you get a chance to take a look at the book, can be a little bit overwhelming because it's very, very detailed. But there's been a lot of research put into that book and those planting charts. Okay, I've kind of given you a brief summary of it right here. So here are some spacing for common vegetable crops, right? So you can see how different they are. In one row of beans, you can get quite a few, and they're 6 inches apart versus broccoli 15 inches apart. Right. So when you're planting your plan, so if on your 3x3 or whatever, take that into consideration. How far apart am I going to plant these plants? Okay. And again, California Master Gardener Handbook and How to Grow More Vegetables are good resources for that information. Okay. The other way that we can actually optimize the planting distance and actually optimize water is by planting our plants in kind of a hex pattern. If I plant them in a row, I'm not going to get as many in the bed. So if you watch that video from Sonoma County, they talk about planting them intensively. So planting the plants as close as they possibly can be to, but at the appropriate distance. You'll do a couple of things. You'll save water, but then also too, you actually will create a little bit of a living mulch, right? So the leaves will kind of barely be touching each other. So this hex pattern drawing here on the right, you can see where we're planting these little lettuce things at this kind of, like I said, that's like this little hex, right? And then as the plants get bigger, the leaves will barely touch each other. It's going to help with a bunch of things. It's going to help keep the soil cool. It's sort of a living mulch. It's going to keep the weeds down. Again, we haven't really talked about weeds. That's always an issue. And then so it'll actually maximize your garden space as well, because many of us have small spaces. So there's lots of advantages to being able to use the hex system. Okay. And again, after we transplant, we're going to mulch, right? 2 to 3 inches, especially in the Sunnyvale area, you're going to want to mulch, all right? So when you're finished planting everything. Use like definitely have some mulch. And again, hopefully you all have leaves from deciduous trees. We have very few here on the coast, so save them. Right, you can use them. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about watering. Okay, so um, we talked about a couple hours ago this idea of putting together your watering plan. But before you kind of build your garden, how are you going to water it? Are you going to be using your hose? Are you going to try to install a drip irrigation system? Okay, or are you going to do both? So we now are really recommending the drip irrigation. Their drip irrigation is pretty straightforward these days. There's lots of fairly inexpensive ways that you can set up a drip irrigation system for your garden beds. So plan ahead, right, and see if you can do that. I mean, like if I can do it, anybody can do it. I like and was very resistant to using drip irrigation because I don't like all of those tubes and stuff, and they break and you need to repair them and blah blah blah. But they do optimize our water usage, and I think it's important if you can afford it. All right, I put together those 4 beds that you saw a couple hours ago. That drip irrigation system was a couple $100. Okay, so that includes a really nice timer with battery, which is hooked up right to my spigot. It has a filter, and then I bought, a big, half-inch poly pipe and brought it over, and I've got the little quarter-inch ones. Okay. So, but if that's not in the picture right now and you need to, I mean, maybe you're having just a container garden at this point, you're going to be hand watering. Okay. And you can do a combination of the two. If you don't have like a smart controller, sometimes and especially with some of the sporadic weather that we have, hot one day, not so hot the next day, if we set our timer on our water system and we have like 3 or 4, I live in a foggy climate, right? I can have 4 or 5 days of very, very foggy weather. And then I can have 4 or 5 days of very sunny weather. So it not for drip irrigation timing, it's not necessarily a one size fits all. So I usually set it for a minimal amount for the cooler days. And then on the warmer days, you can do like some additional hand watering, and that actually works pretty well, instead of having to reset the timer or whatever. That's sort of like my not so technical hack on using a drip irrigation system. Again, we want to avoid using overhead sprinklers. Okay, I think that's everybody's pretty clear on that. Um, so, all right, I think we already did talked about that. Okay, the in-ground beds and the raised beds are easily fitted to drip irrigation. And like I said, if this is your first garden and you can afford it and you want to do it, then I would recommend it. Okay, pots and small containers are really, like I said before, they're going to be you. The best way to do that is to hand water them. Okay. All right, so timers and sensors are going to optimize our efficiency. Um, uh, the drip irrigation is going to save water by minimizing evaporation. And the best time of day is we can turn those things on in the morning. They're all on timers. And you can get them, even like, at dawn. We have our drip irrigation at the big garden goes on at 5. We have it set up. We have different like sections, and they start at around 5:45. So, and the great thing about the drip irrigation is that it will water your garden when you're not home. So if you can go on vacation, okay. Hand watering, again, hand watering can still be water wise if done properly. You can adjust the amount of water and depending on the plant needs and the weather conditions. There are some disadvantages, the potential for shallow root growth, right? So we want to make, sometimes, we like don't water enough, or we're in a hurry. And of course, then water evaporation. The drip irrigation, the drip is going to drip right on the soil, and drip in fairly quickly versus the hand watering. So that's something to consider. If you're hand watering, use a hand watering nozzle that allows control and direction of the water stream. So these are my favorite things to use. Bosca might be, recommending some of these. I'm not really sure, but we need to use the settings that will deliver a very gentle spray. We do not want a heavy spray. We want to avoid one overwatering. We want to avoid compacting the soil. We want to avoid runoff. Okay. Oh, I just said that. Okay. And again, if you're watering, I think pretty much anybody who's spent more than a minute in California knows that we want to avoid watering the paths, patios, and decks. Okay. Avoid watering during the heat of the day. This is going to obviously promote water evaporation and waste of water. But also to some plants if it's really hot, and all y'all get pretty hot in Sunnyvale. So if you're in the 90s or whatever, and you can get those plants wet, they will kind of burn. So the best time of the day to water, again, it's going to be in the early morning. So get up early, 7 o'clock in the morning or earlier, just at dawn. Do your watering as necessary. If that's not possible, then wait till the end of the day, about 2 hours before sunset, and then you'll still have adequate time to water, especially in your climate. There'll still be time for the water to evaporate so that you don't get a mildew or fungus from the water. Okay, so harvesting, okay? So caring for the bed throughout the season. I left that whole part out, all right? That is mostly doing some weed control, making sure that your watering is adequate, and really just kind of, getting kind of excited about seeing what you're growing. This is two kinds of kale, I think. I mean, you know me, I grow a lot of kale here on the coast side. Um, so depending on what you plant, so a lot of plants uh, I spelled weather wrong in there. Anyway, leafy vegetables you can harvest multiple times. That will give you a continuous harvest. Those are going to be your broccoli and spinach and your leaf vegetables. And other vegetables, well, it's just a single harvest, right? One beet, right? She comes out of the ground, right? So cabbage, carrots, and radishes. If you harvest them, if you plant them in succession, sometimes you can get veggies for months, and this is what I enjoy doing as well. Learn when your vegetables are ready to harvest. And this is a silly picture, but bigger is not always better. There was a giant carrot that I completely missed, and look how big it is. So potatoes can get pretty big, so no. And of course, zucchini, it's the silliness, right? We have that huge image in our mind of, the 2.5 foot zucchini that we don't know what to do with, and peas and pumpkins, onions and carrots, those can all get kind of big. So you'll get a feel for it when you grow them a few times. Gee, that's too big, right? Peas will tend to get really kind of tough, right? They won't be sweet anymore. Pumpkins, of course, they're just can get a little bit too big. So learn when you can. So there we have children harvesting. Anyway, so again, so mostly the most important part of doing all of this is to really have some fun. You're going to have an opportunity to grow food. It's very, very rewarding. It's a great thing to do with your family. You're outdoors. There's lots of studies that have shown that people who garden, have, less resistance to disease and they're healthier and they have better outlook on life. I mean, there's just lots of benefits to gardening and gardening with your family members or gardening in the community garden. If you don't have a big space, but you have access to a community garden, these are all lots of great health benefits in addition to providing yourself with some food. There's a huge sense of satisfaction and self-sufficiency when we're able to grow some of our own food. And in my neighborhood here in Montera, my across the street neighbor, he always has a big garden. I always have a big garden. We share a lot of stuff, so it's a great thing. You can really develop community and trust and feel a great sense of satisfaction. So I hope you've learned something. We do have a little bit more time for questions if anybody has. I'm happy to answer specific questions.
We do have one question in the chat. Um, The question is, do you recommend using chicken or horse manure as fertilizer?
Oh, okay. So good question. I briefly touched on that. You'll see a lot of amended garden soils that will have chicken manure in them. Okay, and that's fine. That has been composted already. What we want to avoid is using sort of new or hot chicken manure. Okay, so if you have access to chicken manure, my recommendation would be to age it or put it through your whole composting system. Okay. So at the big garden, we have access to the 4-H is just right across the field from us. And so we have access to their goat manure. So their goat manure and straw we bring over to our garden and we put it through our composting system. So that's how we use manure. We make sure that it is fully aged and composted before we add it to the garden because you can burn the your plants if you put in non-aged manure, either horse manure or cow steer manure or chicken manure. All of those manures, right from the animal, is going to be too hot. So, and so I would even an aged chicken manure be pretty judicious with the use of it. You can use too much, and so what you'll tend to is you'll get tons and tons of fast growth to your plants, and unfortunately, they grow too fast, and for some reason, they become a little bit susceptible to insects, and I don't really understand exactly why, and maybe one day I will. But so don't overuse it. But yes, it can certainly, if you have access to it, you can incorporate it into your composting system. Make sure it's aged and or composted before you use it. Okay.
Thank you. And the question, um, Chris asks, any thoughts on Slugo?
Oh, okay. So Sluggo, yeah. Okay. So yeah. Sluggo is the pretty much it's pretty much that is our one thing that we use for a slug and snail um, control. Um, Only use the regular Sluggo. Okay. Sluggo Plus, right? It sounds great, right? Because it's going to kill everything, right? But Sluggo Plus has something in it that actually is not good for beneficial insects, especially bees. So it's a spinosade or something like that. So just want to make sure that you use Sluggo, not Sluggo Plus. Okay. And when you use your Sluggo, look on the label. It will give you an application rate. The tendency is to over apply, not necessary. Okay. Apply according to the application rate, which like for us is like 2 tablespoons for a 100-foot bed, or I mean for a 20-foot bed or something like that. Okay. But Sluggo is the one thing that we use. And occasionally for other if we get an aphid infestation, sometimes we'll use insecticidal soap. Yeah, and those are pretty much the only two things that we use. Does that help?
Great. I think so. Thank you. Do we have any more question for Loretta when we have her?
Any other questions? Like, gee,
Yeah.
I was hoping to learn about blah, and she didn't even mention it. Now's the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, we still have 5 more minutes left. So if you have any question, feel free to raise your hand or put it in a Q&A. And Loretta, do you mind if I give your email in the
Oh,
follow-up email? So if they come up with any further questions after the webinar, they can email you.
yeah, yeah.
Sure.
Sure.
Okay.
And they absolutely can. There's not a problem at all. I mean, if I have a second, I'd like to shamelessly plug our garden here.
Yeah, go for it.
So If I could just speak about this project that we've been doing for like whatever 16, 17 years now. It was founded in 2008. The garden is 3/4 of an acre and it's in Pacifica on school district property. So it was an old soccer field. The garden is essentially a food bank garden at this point. Like about 90% of the produce that we grow, we donate to our local food bank. And it's community volunteer run. We have work days, on Saturdays and and Wednesdays too. And you can contact me at Loretta at pacifica-gardens.org if you have any questions. If you're ever down in Pacifica one Saturday morning and you want to come visit, we would absolutely welcome. You can just come and take a look at the garden, and then ask more questions about what we grow. We're in Pacifica, so we're growing in cool, foggy climate. So certain things that you all can grow, like really great beefsteak tomatoes and peppers and stuff, we can't grow. So, but we can grow every kind of brassica under the sun. So we can grow broccoli year round. We can grow cabbage year round. So it's a different, obviously different types of crops that we can grow. So happy to have you come visit if you want to, or contact me.
Sounds amazing. Thank you for sharing. And Chris says companion plants for pests. So I think he asks, is there any suggestion for companion plants to control pests?
Right. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah. So, companion planting is like can be kind of like a catch-all kind of term, and for certain things, there's not a lot of scientific evidence for it, and but we've all had those experiences. Yes. I mean, I have the John Jevons books has an entire list of what goes better with what, and if you have an opportunity to take a look at that, you can. I the most companion planting that I do right now is I make sure that I have those herbs, those really like the mints and all of those herbs close by, that will help attract beneficial insects and then kind of help with the getting rid of the bad bugs, so to speak, and like some of those natives as well. So there's certain like well-known companions like um, corn and beans and pumpkins. So that's like the three sisters kind of companion planting, and they do very very well together. Like for tomatoes, we often talk about marigolds and some other very strong smelling flowers that really help kind of like detract from the things that eat tomatoes. So I do some companion planning, no doubt.
Great, thank you. Okay, we're about time. And thank you all for coming. Thank you, Loretta, for today. And I encourage you all to visit Loretta's garden. And if you have any further question that come up after the webinar, you can feel free to contact Loretta via email, and I will put her contact information in the follow-up emails, also including the recording of today's webinar and some links, resources that we mentioned, that Loretta and I mentioned in this webinar. Okay, thank you everyone. Thank you, Loretta, again.
Thank
Have
you
a
very
great
much.
night.
Okay, great. Happy gardening, everybody.
Happy gardening. Thank you. Bye bye.